Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gary Sealing. I do DevOps work at Element 84. I'm pleased to introduce Steve Boak, who's VP of Product Design at Datadog. He's going to talk about the techniques they use to build and grow interconnected experiences and platforms for power users. If you've ever been involved in supporting a live production system, you know that these things are pretty complex. So I'm really interested to hear the perspective of someone who lives and breathes the product side of that work. As always, thanks to our speakers and attendees for their flexibility as we move this conference online. And just like all the other talks, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in Slack, and I will moderate them at the end once Steve is ready for them. And with that, take it away.
All right, Gary, thank you so much for the intro. And again, I'm Steve Boak. I run the product design team at Datadog. And I want to talk to you today about designing Workhorse tools and what it means to build power tools for power users. I know a lot of you are engineers. Datadog's customers are primarily engineers and operations professionals, and I've been around this space for a long time, and I wanted to share with you some of the lessons that I've learned in my 10 years in this space, and just for a little bit of history about me. So I've been at Datadog for about 4 years, but I've been at dev tools companies for over 10 years. I was the co-founder of a small company called Opsy and ran product there. I also was a very early employee at a company called Opsmatic that was acquired by New Relic, and before that was at a little network monitoring startup called Boundary that ultimately got acquired by BMC. And as a designer, this wasn't the most intuitive place for me to end up, but there are a few things that I've really loved about it over time. Getting to work with really passionate engineers who speak my language. Like, we dog food everything we build at Datadog. Our engineers use the product every single day. And for me as a designer, it's really rewarding to get their feedback and to be working with people who care so much about the experience of the product and who are so invested in it. We test everything in-house on our own engineers before we roll it out live. And from the very beginning, that's been one of the things that's been most compelling to me about this space and why I've stuck around for so long. And just for a little bit of additional context on Datadog, we are, of course, a DevTools company. We're about 1,600 employees now, and the company is about 10 years old at this point. And when I joined about 4 years ago, I was the 5th designer at Datadog, and the company was about 200 people. And so in these about 4 years, the design team is actually now 33 people, and the company as a whole is over 1,600. So we've doubled in size more or less each of the 4 years that I've been here. So a lot has changed in the structure of the company, the structure of our teams, and the ways we use Datadog. And of course, in our product offerings, we've rolled out many new products in this time. We're selling software as a service, as I imagine many of you are. And so there are some really crucial ways that design has played a role in building our business. And so for us as a tool, I think we get a lot of the same kinds of input. And for me personally, I've heard people describe great tools, great software tools in a lot of the same ways over the years. They want them to be fast and powerful and intuitive and easy to use and personalized, made for me and my use cases. And I think all of this boils down to basically 3 principles. They all start with C. I don't want to call them the 3 C's or anything. If you need a mnemonic device to remember these, they all happen to start with C, but we want them to be consistent, we want them to be connected, and we want them to be configurable. And for me as a designer and running a design team, thinking a lot about the business value of design, I want to unpack each of these 3 principles a little bit. So starting with consistency, this is all about new user adoption. And for the business, we want people to start using our product. We want them to have an easy time doing that, and we don't want to need to hold their hand through a lot of it. A big part of our success as a business has been that Datadog is a turnkey product. Any engineer can install an agent, get started with the software on their own time. They don't need a professional team to come in and help them. We want to maintain that experience over time as we grow. And as we roll out more and more new products, we want people, new companies, new users to be able to onboard quickly without a lot of help. And consistent design can help a lot with that. So next, we want the experience to be connected. Again, we're rolling out more and more of these products for you. Whatever your business, your tool is, if you're growing, you're gonna start offering more and more products. And you wanna upsell your existing customers on those new products. This is a crucial part of our business. As we launch new products, we want our existing customers to buy those new products to expand, and we wanna upsell them. And when we have a great story about how these products work together and about how this tightly integrated experience will make their lives easier, we have a much easier time upselling our products to them. And last but not least, configurability. Land and expand is a big part of selling dev tools into businesses. What often happens with us and at many of the companies I've worked at is one team or one person even inside a company will start using our product. If they love it, if they start using it as part of their workflow, that one person or one team can expand to many teams and many different groups of people. We want each of those groups to have a unique and configurable experience in the product. This is a really big part of how tools work. You really want to configure them to your workflows, how you work, the other tools that you work with. I'll unpack all of these ideas more as I go through the deck, but these are really the three most important principles of design of tools and where I think design adds the most business value. So to build on all of this, I want to start with some principles in a book by Brad Frost called Atomic Design. And as a designer, I know this book and these principles well. For any of you that don't, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about these, but for many of you may already be working with design systems at your companies, React components, something like Storybook, where you have code, you have reusable components that you want laid out across your product. For us, when we started building our design system about 2 years ago, the teeth of the problem was actually front-end engineering, the developer time that was going into rewriting the same code over and over and over again. And so for this was first and foremost about saving time ourselves. But a lot of these principles apply in other ways. And so I want to begin this by talking about some of those principles. And so atomic design begins with atoms. The atomic unit of a design system is an individual component. I'll describe all this more in detail, but you build out these components into molecules or groups of components that have some kind of function. Those molecules expand and combine into organisms, and ultimately the purpose, and this is all stuff that he describes in the book, you're using these atoms and molecules to build out page templates and ultimately have consistent pages in your products. And so to expand on these ideas a bit more, the atoms, again, in the system are these individual components. So here I've got three atoms, three components. I've got a label, a search input, and a search button. So again, three atoms, and now I can combine them in interesting ways. So with a molecule, I'm going to take these three individual components and make one search form. So the label, the input, and the button all become part of a search input, and I can use this lockup, this combination of components, this molecule, anywhere in the product where I want to do search. And I can now combine and aggregate these in interesting ways into organisms. So for something like a Google search results page, I've got a search form where I can input the search. I've got a search result object with some descriptions, the link. And so, here are two molecules that I've combined into this organism, and then I just start combining more and more of those into entire page templates. Here I have like real content in here in part just to communicate with you, the audience, about what's going on here. The template is meant to be agnostic in its content. Like this is the, again, the cluster of components that I'm using to make an archetypal page. But this doesn't really become a page until it has content, like these specific search results for a specific search that I enter here. Again, I'm kind of filling in this content for the purposes of communicating with you, but it's meant to be like a template page that's agnostic. And so again, the goal here is to have these components within the page to ultimately build out consistent looking and feeling pages. But I want to argue to you that these same principles can be applied to workflows and to building entire products. And that's really what I want to spend the next section of the talk on, is taking the same atomic design logic and applying it to products and specifically to tools, because the products that we build, the tools that we design, have a lot of the same kinds of workflows in them. And I've seen many of those same kinds of workflows over the years at many different places. And so I want to share some of that with you. So beginning with this atomic design logic and these pages. So starting from a template, starting from a page template from the atomic design principles, this is actually going to be our atom for a workflow. So a single page is a single atom in this system. And when I combine those pages into molecules via workflows, this is a molecule. So imagine the Google homepage, which is really just like a search input, and then entering a search, going to a search results page where now I have a few of these molecules, but now this is one workflow. This is one molecule in our system, this single workflow. And again, I'm going to represent this with this little workflow icon, just connections between two page templates. And then I can combine these workflows in interesting ways to build out organisms. and ultimately entire products. So kind of showing this all in one place. I've got the page level component logic to build out entire pages, and I'm going to take that same logic, the template for a page being the atomic unit of our system for workflows, and building out entire products is basically collections of these workflows. And this is all a little bit abstract. So now let's get into some real examples. So as I said, we're talking about building products generally, but within tools, I really want to talk about 3 kinds of views and then 2 kinds of workflows connecting those views. So I'll begin with the atoms, these 3 kinds of atoms, these 3 kinds of views that are really important to tool design. So again, going back to the atoms, the first is a summary view. So I've got this kind of icon representation of this, but this is basically something like a dashboard, a high-level summary of what's going on. And as an example of that in Datadog, this is one of our dashboards. This is a user-generated object. This is something that somebody builds up for their own needs. It starts as a blank slate. I configure each one of these widgets to tell some kind of story. This might be, for a single person, it might be for a team of people that shares this information, but it's supposed to give me some high-level summary of content that I myself can customize. The query of alerts that I want to look at, functions, and this then feeds into an Explorer view. And this is the real workhorse view in our product. These searchable, these very deeply searchable, with parametric searches and save searches, these powerful search views in the product. Where here I'm looking at logs, but I can be looking at many different kinds of things. But ultimately, I'm using these kinds of powerful searches to connect to a detail view or a view of an individual object. So here, the detail view is not a view per se. Like when I click on one of the logs, in this case, I get this pop out side panel, but this is the detail view, the view of that one object that gives me all the details of that thing. And if this, again, all still feels a little abstract, I'll summarize this and say, again, these are the 3 kinds of views, this high-level summary, and they kind of go from the coarsest level of detail to the finest, where at the very high level, I've got this summary, a dashboard telling me what's going on right now, an exploration view that allows me to search in really powerful ways, and then ultimately a detail view that shows me, all the details of what's going on. And the important thing is once I've got these 3 kinds of views, now I can devise workflows to connect them. And so the molecules of the system, and importantly, these 2 kinds of molecules, these 2 kinds of workflows, one of them, again, using this icon to represent the workflow, but then essentially these 2 kinds of workflows, the drill down and the pivot to connect these different views. So I'll begin with drill downs and how they work and why they matter. So from these 3 atomic views, the summary, the explorer, and the detail, the drill downs are effectively the ways of connecting them and how we move from this very coarse summary to an exploration to a very detailed view at the bottom. And so I'll begin with this dashboard. And again, this is the summary view. This is this user-generated content where I, as a user, build up a widget to tell me, here are the monitors within the system that are alerting right now. Or here is a graph over time of Lambda invocations versus errors, basically like, a count of good and bad log entries. And, again, I configure the queries for each of these things. Configurability is a theme that we'll come back to later. But, I define queries underlying all these things. This isn't just a summary of any query. It's like a very specific query that I've set up and to tell me a story about what's going on in my world. And so now I can click on one of the bars in this graph, and that is going to drill me down. So I click to view the related logs. I drill down to that exploration view. And very importantly, that context is carried through. The query that I used to set up that graph is already here for me. So the source from Lambda, the fact that these are errors, all that is carried through automatically as context. And so from that widget that's telling me what's going on in my world, if there is some kind of problem, I get a more detailed view of exactly what that is through the list of errors, the graph of errors over time. And again, that search is all set up for me so that I don't have to recreate that context manually. And then last but not least, assuming this is a real error and I want to pinpoint the exact source of it, I can click on one of these logs. That's going to open up that detail pane. And then I can see the exact source of the issue, a log coming off of Lambda that I think in this case is telling me that I'm out of memory. So, this is a core troubleshooting workflow in Datadog from, a summary widget, a summary widget in a graph down to a detailed exploration view, and ultimately down to a view of a single thing. And in our case, this is all about troubleshooting, finding the source of a problem, and going deeper. These exact same kinds of workflows don't just apply to troubleshooting. No matter the kind of tool that you're building, there is almost certainly some use case for a high-level summary that drills down to exploration and detail. And so here again, I want to pause for a second and just talk about this, because I have worked at a few very small startups. I've advised a few very small startups on early product specs. This footprint is basically an MVP product spec. If you are a very small startup launching your first product, I think all of these three things are crucial to the success of it. So again, this stateful summary. I've seen quite a few small startups begin with something like an exploration view or an event feed. Imagine trying to troubleshoot a problem in Slack, looking like at a feed of every error that's coming in and trying to establish the context of everything that's happening right now based on some kind of real-time feed. Without this stateful summary to start you on your journey, like here's what's broken right now, here is when the spike in errors started happening, it's really hard to begin with that meaningful context. So the summary view is an important piece of this. Then carrying that through to some context-sensitive drill down. So, clicking on the things that are alerting, clicking on a point in a graph, getting that search pre-populated to get me through that journey faster and fast and seamlessly, and ultimately trying to get to that source. So searchable URL addressable views, URL addressability is another topic I'll come back to a little bit later. But again, I've seen this go wrong without all of these pieces in place. And these building blocks are all essential to building out other products, which I'll get into more as we go too. So that's the MVP spec for a single product or a single product area. But for our purposes, I actually want to introduce another drill down workflow, because ultimately we're going to connect these up. So I'll begin at another point in our product, which is a map of services, a map of engineering services and how they talk to each other. This is actually trace data. So, these are two services talking to each other via traces. And this is configurable, not quite in the same way as a dashboard, but each of these services is essentially tagged with an environment. I tell it which services are part of my environment so that whenever I look at this map, I only see the services that I care about. So I can create kind of my own map that tells me what's going on in my world. And in the same way that I was drilling down from that dashboard, I can see that there's a problem with one of these services, this auto process service. I click, I get a menu of options, and I can drill down to see the analytics, the app analytics for this service. And again, that rich context is carried through for me, the service name, the environment, the fact that it's an error. All this is pre-set up. And here I can see some graphs at the top telling me, what's been happening over time with requests and errors and latency. And again, the search context is really important to this. It's carried forward through into the search view. And ultimately, if I do see a problem here, I can again clicked on the wrong one, click on a trace, and then see the details of that and see where the problem was happening. So very much a similar workflow, starting from two very different spots, but with a lot of the same principles in mind, and two complete but disconnected drill down workflows. So that is one kind of workflow. Now let's get into the second kind of workflow, which is the pivot. So as you might guess, now we're going to start connecting these up. And in our case, I hope, since many of you are engineers, you understand this maybe even better than I do. But one of the things to know about traces and logs is that you often have many log entries as part of a single trace. And that if I'm looking at the details of a single trace, I can carry that forward to see specifically within a trace where something might have gone wrong by looking at a single log. So I can move from the details of a single trace over to both like an exploration view of all the logs coming off of a trace, and even from a single trace to a single log. So two kinds of pivots, kind of laterally and up, and then directly across from detail view to detail view. And I'll show you each of these in practice. So again, starting from this trace detail view, within this detail, I have a separate panel for logs. So I can see all the logs that are being generated, not just by this service or this environment, but the logs for this individual trace. And I have a couple of calls to action here. I've got a button to look at all the logs for this trace. I can separately click on one of the individual logs to see it from the trace. And so I'll show you each of these workflows. So I'll go back and I'll begin with going laterally and up from a detail view to an exploration view. So again, starting from this logs view, I have this call to action to open these traces, these logs for this trace in the logs view. That's going to move me sideways and up. So I'm now looking at the log exploration view with this filter in place for a single trace, and I can see all the logs being generated by this trace. This is all these screenshots, all these workflows are coming from a pretty clean demo environment that we've set up. So, it's pretty obvious here. There's like one red log entry. This is the source of the problem. In reality, it might not be so simple. You might actually have to do some digging here to figure out what went wrong. But in our case, it's pretty straightforward to then say, okay, here's the red one. Oops. And again, sorry, the context is carried through from the trace. But it's pretty easy here to then say, okay, I'll click on this one thing, ultimately to find the source of the problem. In this case, again, it's pretty straightforward what's happening. But if you did want to jump straight across from trace detail to log detail, you could do that same thing. So now I'll just show that really quickly, going from the details of a single trace, clicking on a single log and going directly across to the details of that thing. To the details of that log. So now I have two complete drill downs and a pivot, a couple of pivots between them. This is a small set of examples of how to do this, but we use these same principles to build out many of the different product areas and the connections between them here. And again, that's really what the organisms of product building are all about. These groups of workflows to drill down in different product areas, to use pivots to connect between them, and that the interesting combinations of those workflows are how we build products and tools specifically. And again, so I'll unpack this a little bit more. We talked about the two drill down workflows for traces and for logs separately. We talked about the pivot workflow to move from a trace detail up to log exploration and an individual log. These actually go in reverse as well. I can pivot from an individual log up to a service and even to an individual trace off of this. And there are many more kinds of pivots available in the product. But this is, again, the kind of architecture for building out these organisms and combining these workflows in interesting ways. So kind of putting that all in one place, Brad Frost's Atomic Design book lays out a set of principles to build pages out of components and this atomic design of them. I'm trying to use that same logic to talk about workflows and tools and building out entire products using collections of workflows. So coming back to those three principles: consistency, connectedness, and configurability. And again, the business value of consistency being an ability for customers to learn quickly how to use different products, to have consistent ways to use those products so that they can figure out how to do things quickly and without a lot of help. And so just to unpack a few of the specific measures that we've taken for consistency, kind of beginning at the top here. So I showed you these two summary views, the service map and the dashboard, and the direct manipulation, the interaction is the same in both places. I can click on one of these services in the map, see a menu of related options. In the dashboard, I have that same contextual click through. And so this pattern is very much designed to be consistent across these two kinds of graphs. I also want to say that we're actually going through an exercise now to improve this. This happens to be kind of a flat list of logs, traces, like different product areas are sort of combined into a single flat list here. But as the number of options and the precision, or there are different options that one might have for logs or traces or anything, we actually want to give people a more nuanced view, where we cluster different options into categories and sort of have a hierarchical setup of options. So even this is it's a principle that we're iterating on over time to try to make this more consistent, more powerful, and more customized to the user's experience. And then carrying that down into these exploration views, a lot of the same principles are used in both of these, where again, I've got the searches presented in the same way. I can save searches. These controls are organized in almost identical ways. This importantly uses a lot of the logic from the original, the page-based atomic design. Like these components, these collections of components are organized on the page in very consistent ways, so that when I'm on one of these Explorer views, I have the same sets of controls in the same places. We use the same for faceted searches and saved views, for the table components and the actions that I can take. So based on one of these queries, it'll produce some set of results, and I can share that. I can take different actions. I can configure the columns in the table. We've tried to organize all those controls in consistent ways so that whenever I'm on one of these exploration views, almost via muscle memory, I know where to reach my mouse on the screen to do certain kinds of tasks. And last but not least, the detail views. So here I can show a little bit of the uglier side of this. This is an ongoing task for us. We're never quite where we want to be, but here these are meant to be presented in very consistent ways. But a couple of things that we still need to fix. We've got some nice buttons here in the corner, but we actually are missing some of the contextual actions here. On the log side, these links, these text inputs, or these are actually meant to be links. In fact, when I click on this, a menu will show up, but I really have no affordance that that's the case. So I really just wanted to emphasize that we are not perfect at this. It's an ongoing process for us to improve these things, to make them better, to make them more consistent. We've been working on our systems for 2 years now, and it still feels like we're miles away from where we want to be. And it's been a pretty long effort for us. So this being largely a conference for developers, APIs are also a huge part of what we do. And I really want to talk a little bit about how the logic of consistency applies not just to our UIs, but to the APIs that we develop. And so importantly, as you're developing many different product areas, lexical and grammatical consistency, using the same terms, using the same grammars. If you use logical or in one place and pipes in another place, that's not consistent. If you're mixing keywords like environment and env, that's not consistent. When I've talked to people about developing APIs, some of the best advice and logic that I think I've seen is to write the documentation first. You design that lexical and grammatical consistency in from the beginning so that as you build out more and more product areas, you can guarantee from the start that you're going to be using the same logic, the same terms and the same grammars. And then also with APIs, you have this added constraint that there's no UI. The only response you really get from an API is an error message if something goes wrong. So you really, as a designer, you want to spend time to have clear, consistent, and verbose error messages, because that might be the only indication someone has of what went wrong. So you want to do as much as you can to tell them about what went wrong and to give them some actionable information from it, because it might be their only opportunity to get feedback from you. And I want to emphasize this as a point of growth, because as we Datadog have leveled up as a company, as we have moved up market and sold our products to bigger and bigger organizations, automation is an increasing concern for us. Bigger organizations using Datadog want to automate more of their daily tasks, things like monitor management, dashboard management. So this might not seem really important early on, but laying the groundwork for this becomes crucial later as you're building out collections of products and as people are trying to automate more and more of this. Automation and APIs are a key touch point for external users. So it's really important to start thinking about this early. So from consistency to connectedness. And again, we are all trying to sell more and more products, to offer our customers more and more things, and to expand and connect those product offerings in meaningful ways and to upsell our existing customers. So as we build out more and more of these products, we really try to apply this logic of connectedness that, again, you want the surface area of your product to grow. You want to expand your offering, to sell those new offerings to your existing customers. And it's a lot easier to sell these new products to your customers when you have a great story about how they're connected. And again, for us, for Datadog, this is a huge part of our growth. Our net retention, basically the measure of if we were to stop selling Datadog to new customers tomorrow, we would still be growing at more than 40% year over year, just by our existing customers buying more of our products and expanding their user base within those companies. So this has been a crucial part of our growth as a company as well. And so I want to tie this idea of connectedness through to developers as well, that building tools for developers, we are but one piece in a puzzle. We are part of a workflow that every engineer has their workflow, whether it's, connection with GitHub, Terraform, AWS, PagerDuty. I mean, these are some of the common tools that we are asked to integrate with, but our products for developers never exist in isolation. We are part of an ecosystem of tools. Our success as companies depends on our connectedness to these other tools and to our ability to integrate within this workflow. Just a couple of minor examples of this. You can trigger auto scaling events in AWS off of Datadog metrics. We will bring code deploy events from config management tools like Chef or Puppet or Ansible into Datadog, so that when you're looking at a graph, you can overlay deploy events on that. And of course, it's a great signal to see, oh, there was a spike in latency after this most recent deploy, and to use that as a signal for something like a rollback. And again, integration with this tool chain is really critical. We cannot and do not exist in isolation. And finally, for configurability, again, this is all about landing and expanding from one team using your product to many teams starting to use it. You want each of those teams to be able to configure the experience to be tailored to their needs as a group. And so here, it was an interesting one for me to unpack, because I've been around this space for a while, and the way I'm identifying it today is sort of how opinionated a tool is and where you are as a company and what kind of configurability you want to introduce into your product will depend a lot on how opinionated your tool is. And I'll try to make this clear with a few examples. So at the bottom on the left is a tool that's not opinionated at all, something like Tableau, where it's an empty slate. If you've used Tableau, you really start with nothing. You begin by defining data sources. I want to bring in S3 or Redshift or some SQL database, whatever it is. That's like your starting point. And so you integrate with those data sources. You actually choose the individual dimensions and measures, like the actual data points that you want to bring into the thing. You choose a visualization type. You organize filters into here. It makes no assumptions about what kind of data you're bringing in, and you create everything. Every notebook, I think these are called notebooks, but every workbook that you build is a completely bespoke collection. The data that goes into it, the visualizations you've applied. It's meant to be this very general, unopinionated data analysis tool. And the kinds of choices that they have to make very much depend on that. The bit of time that I've spent with this, they're starting to do some interesting things where, based on the kinds of measures that you pick, it will sort of recommend visualizations. So it tries to become opinionated, but it makes very few assumptions up front. Sorry, I think I just got a message in Slack, although I'm having some trouble paging over. Give me 1 second here and I'll see if I can. No, I can't. So moving up the spectrum a little bit to the middle of the spectrum, I would say a tool like Datadog fits, where we are more opinionated than Tableau, but maybe less opinionated than some other tools. So for example, one of our dashboards, we do make a lot of assumptions about where your data is coming from. We have a widget type in our dashboards for service level objectives, a totally bespoke type of data that engineers are using to say, the uptime of my service is this versus the target of 97%. And, it's hard to imagine Tableau introducing an SLO widget, for example. They're not so opinionated. They would have these specific kinds of operational data on SLOs or alerts or anything like that integrated into their product. But this dashboard is still user-generated content. I start with a blank slate. I build up, queries and widgets that summarize what's going on in my environment, so I can really personalize this experience. And on the upper end of the spectrum, a tool that's very opinionated and has far less configuration available to it is something like Stripe's core dashboard. I know they have a lot of products too. And in all these cases, I should say, I am not an active user of Tableau or Stripe. I don't know a whole lot about all their product offerings, so this is a generalization and oversimplification, whatever you want to call it, but I'm trying to articulate this continuum here. So with Stripe specifically, a lot of it is about payments and about cash moving through a system, and so they do have this kind of core summary view when you enter the product that tells you, transaction volume over time. You have some tools to configure the period of time that you're looking at, to compare it to other periods of time. But I don't have that kind of blank slate dashboard where I build up widgets with very different metric types. This is really all about dollars, the money moving through the system. And so it's a much more opinionated tool that makes a lot of assumptions about the kind of data you're looking at and the kinds of things you want to see in that data. And again, for you building out whatever tool you're building, identifying where you are on this continuum can dictate a lot of the choices that you make about how configurable your product is and in what ways you want your product to be configured. So one thing though that all of these tools have in common is advanced search. And so I want to spend time on that because it's a crucial part of tool development and developer tool development specifically. So here's just a little recording of advanced search in Datadog. We take a lot of pains to do things like autocomplete and type ahead. We integrate it with save views so that if you start typing the name of a save view, you can get to it. But these kinds of parametric faceted searches, and actually I'm going to pause it here because this click, there's this little button here to kind of transition from that more user-friendly visualization of the search to the raw query. And this is the raw query that I can copy and paste into the API. So I want to just recognize that for a moment because I have the kind of user-friendly autocomplete version of this, but then I've also got like the raw query as an advanced tool. We want to make both of those options available. And again, there's a whole set of UI principles around like autocomplete, highlighting, everything that's gone into the details of this micro interaction within search. Stripe also has the same kinds of faceted advanced searches, like transactions created in the last week, and they have legendary API documentation, API quality. So these are all important principles when you're designing advanced search in your products. And again, I kind of highlighted this in the video, but I've got this user-friendly query. I can URL addressability, also crucial. The fact that these queries are URL addressable is what ultimately empowers us to carry them through to dashboards and other parts of the products, to deep link from things. So URL, all of these queries and all of the products that we offer are URL addressable. And again, that portability to the API is also critical for a few reasons. One, as a developer, I can just copy and paste this query into the API, but maybe even more importantly than that, I can use the UI to test my query. This is a really important part of the process for customers using our product to automate. They come into the UI because they're not always certain what query they want for a given thing. So they try it out, they use the UI, then when they're ready, they can just copy and paste this, put it into the API for automation. So the fact that these queries are portable to the API is a crucial piece of that. Sorry, I go through some extra steps to highlight it here. And again, that portability is what powers everything else in the product. So these summary views all have all are powered by these URL addressable queries where I can basically copy and paste a URL or a query or a set of filters to configure how each of these widgets will behave. And all of the workflows, the drill downs in particular, the fact that I can click on one of these graphs and get a relevant, contextually sensitive entry that's all powered by these advanced search principles. And right, and then as you scale up, the faceted searches become save searches. So faceted, URL addressable, API portable searching, for us, as a company that's growing pretty quickly, one engineering team becomes 3 engineering teams. As these teams grow and expand and subdivide, the portability actually becomes an issue at scale because I might have, a bookmark, a URL for a query, but if my team is changing once a year and we've got a set of dashboards that we're managing, then being able to save those queries, to actually update them for an entire team of people that might be relying on them. Once I have a saved query in place, the actual URL doesn't matter quite as much where, as the scope or, if my team creates some new service, that might even be a better near-term example. Like we spin up a new microservice. We want that to be part of this query. Now, if all I have is a URL, I've got to manually update every dashboard widget, everything in the product, anytime anything changes as far as scope. So safe searches have been an important scaling principle in all that. And so for us over time, this is like a really rough roadmap of 3 or 4 years of scaling save search up or scaling advanced search up at Datadog. On the ground floor, like every product should begin with URL addressable and API friendly advanced searches for the reasons that I said, for sharing, for portability, for testing queries in the UI. As you start to scale up, as teams are growing and changing and adding new things, being able to save and port those queries easily is really important. And now for us, this is feeding into things like role-based access. As really large companies start using the product, they have sensitive information that they don't even want shared internally. We now start to define access rules based on saved searches, based on queries. And so we can now restrict access to certain parts of the product, certain kinds of data based on these saved kinds of queries. We can actually improve the experience of the product by introducing tag controls. Once we've identified someone's role in the organization, we can start to personalize that product experience based on the kinds of queries we know that they run and based on what we know that they have access to, so they're not pulling up empty queries. Yeah, and again, so this is kind of a roadmap of how we have needed to scale up search over time. And so next, I want to talk about these entry points into the product and what I want to call front doors. So I showed a few of these already. I showed you a dashboard, I showed you a service map. And so I want to talk a little bit about the use cases behind these and the configurability of each. So again, this kind of dashboard, a summary of what's going on potentially across many things. This could be for me, this could be for a team. But my goal here is to just get a broad assessment, like a proactive view of what's going on to begin to identify problems proactively. Like I can see a spike in errors. I can see that there's a count of errors going on here. And at least in our office and in many of our customers' offices, these are sitting on TVs on the wall. They're meant to be this kind of broad proactive view to help people who are invested in something, catch an issue before it begins. This might be quite different from, a dashboard that's configured in a different way for troubleshooting. So wherever you begin in the product, if I'm a software engineer that's responsible for a service, I can organize a set of dashboards, a set of tools just to help me troubleshoot this one thing. So the scope of this might be much tighter, like a single service and some of its dependencies, where I've got some really detailed metrics here about performance and reliability, and I can drill down on each of these graphs to help me identify problems. So even with dashboards, there can be some really different use cases in mind. And we have some other purpose-built visualizations. If I'm an infrastructure engineer or somebody that's managing a lot of infrastructure, we've got a map of hosts where I can configure different views to help me find, say a hotspot in CPU utilization for a particular geographic region or role. And in other cases, like the service map that I showed, where if I'm an application engineer looking at dependencies, maybe I know there's an issue with one application and it's got an upstream dependency that might be the source of a problem. I can create a bespoke view like this to help me identify the source of a problem. But ultimately, these configurable front doors are meant to do a few things well. They're a jumping off point into the product. I begin with a view like this, but I don't end here. These are not designed to be workhorse views. They're not views that are meant to be to spend a ton of time in. And they're also, frankly, designed to look good. We spend a lot of time on the UX, on the visual design of these things more than in other places, because these are entry points into the product. We want people to have a great first run experience, to have a compelling first run experience, and to use that to launch into these more detailed views. So finally, integrations, I have a single slide on this. I could probably devote 20 minutes to all of the effort that has gone into our integrations and how they power the product experience. But we begin every customer demo by talking about the number of these, the power that they have. And it's really not an understatement to say that these have been crucial to the success of our platform and to the success of a lot of tools and developer tools products. Once you turn on these integrations, they carry through your product experience. We're bringing in metrics from AWS. We're sending in metrics to other places. We're collecting different kinds of data, metrics, events, logs. Once you've turned these on, and especially during onboarding, this can be a crucial piece of getting new customers in. So it's a part of everything. It's a part of that consistent experience. Like once we know that a customer is using AWS, we can start to automatically build out content for them. We can namespace their metrics in really consistent ways because they're coming in from AWS. Um, we can, again, customize and make that experience more consistent once that integration is set up. And so again, for developer tools, for tools especially, this is a huge part of the business. So coming back to these themes and to the business value of design, again, consistency. You want customers to have a great onboarding experience. You want them to have to be able to learn the product easily without a lot of hand holding. When the product is well connected, you can start to offer more and more products and to have meaningful story connecting those products together so that you can upsell your existing customers, you can grow your business. As you start offering more products, you get more people onboarded onto them. And configurability, all about that personalization, so that as one team becomes many, you land and expand into that customer, you get more and more teams using your product. Each one of them can have a personalized experience with your platform. And that is it. Thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed putting this together and sharing this with all of you today.
All right, thanks, Steve. If anybody has questions, please feel free to post them in the Slack, and I'll give people a couple of minutes to type them. Oh, somebody asked if you're gonna post a link to your slides somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I will post the link to the slides. I don't have it up yet. This is a Keynote file right now. I need to clean it up and export it, but I will absolutely post them publicly.
Sure. And I think one of the organizers of ET has been going through and pinning all the slides in the Slack channels once we get them.
Okay.
All right, so a question, you talked about a spectrum of configurable. Are there advantages or disadvantages to being more or less configurable?
No, I really tried to make pains during it to emphasize that it's not better or worse at all. It's really just where you are, where your tool is meant to be on the spectrum. Like Tableau has a huge business. Datadog has a huge business. Like we are targeting specific kinds of users. The kind of general purpose tool that Tableau or Looker or Snowflake, these kinds of data warehouse tools, like they're targeting potentially a broad user base, that interacts with many different kinds of data sets. Stripe obviously has a pretty good business working on payments. So it is not a question of better or worse. It's just a question of clearly identifying the kind of user that you're targeting because the configuration can fall out of that.
All right, I don't see any more questions, but thanks
Cool.
for giving a talk. That was great.
All right. Thank you so much. It was really fun.
All right, thanks everyone for attending.